We know how health is our major wealth, and purpose gives us energy, consistent vibrancy, I would say. And we all know how energy is everything to us. To accomplish, however, anything we want in life, we need to generate clean, deep energy to set ourselves for success. Unfortunately, we know how difficult it might be at times to shift our mindset and beliefs that are deeply inside of us about what's healthy and good for us. And today, I have the pleasure to host and speak with an extraordinary woman who left her successful lawyer profession to help other women achieve their goals associated with weight loss and personal happiness. Actually, welcome. I'm extremely happy to have you here with me today. Can you please tell us how long Food Psychology Clinic has been opened in UK, and who is your typical client?
Hi, Barbara. Firstly, thank you so much for having me here as well today. So we've been running for a while now, so I would say about 3 years in various different forms. Obviously, the business has evolved over that time, but the typical client is any woman really. So, and even some men as well, but predominantly women of all ages, from all backgrounds, all different cultures, and actually all the way from all different regions of the world. And these are all women who, I guess, have bought into that common advice that we're often given, that all you need to do to get healthy is lose weight, is eat less and exercise more, which makes sense. And I guess on the surface level, we all know that that's true. But as you mentioned, there's a lot more underlying that, which means that we can't often achieve those things despite knowing that they're probably what's best for us.
Absolutely. So tell me, actually, what are the typical three, I would say, false claims that people make and had in mind before they actually met you about weight loss? Like their false beliefs.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think one of the big ones is the all or nothing mindset. So if you want to lose weight, you have to ban everything. You have to go 100% only eating good food. And if you eat a biscuit, then you've fallen off the wagon. That's it. That means you can, give up and completely, there's no point in trying. And that all or nothing mindset is something that I see really often. And in psychotherapy, it's a term often that we use when we're dealing with people who have perfectionism. So you have a really high standard for yourself and you think, okay, I have to achieve 100%. I have to only eat healthy all of the time. But then you're not giving yourself that flexibility to eat, the 80-20 mindset is much healthier. You're allowing yourself that flexibility to sometimes eat something which perhaps isn't so healthy without feeling like you've then fallen off the wagon and are then going to give up completely. Another one I see quite often is the idea that you should put off your goals until tomorrow, or until you have more money, or until you have more time, or until there's less stress. Always deferring your goal setting, always deferring going after what you want or your health goals until another point, because now is not a good time. But basically, what you're doing psychologically when you're telling yourself, I'll start tomorrow, I'll start next week, is you're just giving yourself license or permission right now to overindulge on all of those things that you know aren't so good for you. I'll start tomorrow, so right now I'll just have all of this stuff, and tomorrow will be fine. But come round to tomorrow, often the same thing happens all over again. So the all or nothing mindset, trying to put things off until another date, is another very common goal. Very common pattern that I see. And then another thing which I see a lot, and this comes back to what I said at the start, is that people think in order to get healthy, they have to drastically reduce their calorie intake and go crazy with the exercise. But what we've seen time and time again in all of the studies that have been done is that any form of extreme restriction or starvation, psychologically, that causes people to become extremely obsessed with food.
Mm-hmm.
Very often people will come to me after they've done a very restrictive meal plan or a very restrictive diet, and at that point they'll be completely obsessed with food, because our body responds to extreme restriction or a diet in exactly the same way as it responds to a period of starvation. And when we're starving, obviously what the body does then is say, give me food, feed me, feed me. And very often I see that that's when binge eating is born. That's when bulimia is born, because people have really restricted themselves to such a point that their body thinks that they're starving. And at that point, the diet then becomes unsustainable as well.
And restricting in itself, that word, it's so unhealthy and has so many unhealthy connotation with it, don't you think? And it's just limited, it's conditional. And how can you sustain this way for entire life?
Exactly. And actually, the really interesting thing about restriction is just psychologically, as humans, we tend to want what we can't have. We want the forbidden fruit. So if you're telling yourself, I can't have all of these things, or I'm restricting myself to this stuff, your mindset is one of deprivation. Your mindset is one of thinking, oh, I can't have all of these things, which isn't so great or so positive for long-term health or well-being. The way I much prefer to address it is by getting my clients to focus more on how good they feel when they eat good food. So looking more at it from a positive perspective. It's not that they don't want, it's not that they can't have the bad food, it's that they don't want the bad food because it makes them feel awful. They've got to a place of self-love and where they're feeling really good about themselves, that they believe that their body only really deserves amazing food, amazing fuel. And you really can train your taste buds and train your mind to like different things. We often think, oh, because I didn't like it 10 years ago, I'll never like it. But you really can train and change those taste buds at any point in your life if you're willing to build those new habits and willing to start, as you said, approaching these things with a really open mind and going into it saying, maybe I'll be curious, maybe I'll just see, I might like this time.
And I think also actually then the fact that when we were kids, when I was a kid, I didn't like Brussels sprouts. Mm-hmm. You could put anything on top of it that I liked, like parents like to put peanut butter and things on vegetables to make them taste better. You couldn't trick me. I just didn't want them. And I would push them on on the top of the plate, and my grandmother or my mom, depending who was around me at that time, would take a spoon or a fork and just try to, kind of force me, because they said, well, you need to eat your vegetables. 30 years later, I love Brussels sprouts. Nobody's forcing me. I just love the taste. It also, I truly believe, it comes to the way, and I think parents will appreciate if they're watching this, how we present the food to our family when we serve it, or how we present it to ourselves.
Yeah.
What words come out of our mouth as well, right? What is the intention? Because unfortunately, the way I was raised, a lot of this was force. You have to, conditional. If you don't, this happens. And we both know where there is condition, there's usually no joy.
And there's usually rebellion as well, absolutely.
So it's, speaking of changing your, your taste your taste and adapting to different foods, I truly also believe it comes with emotional maturity.
Definitely. And actually, when it comes to children, as you mentioned, there's a whole body of research on that, which is fascinating, which shows that when parents lead by example, when parents show that food is delicious to them, then children are much more likely to want to eat it. If a food is presented in a way that it's exciting or appetizing, broccoli, for example, I remember one study described it as like a dinosaur tree, and the kid was really interested in eating the broccoli then, because it had a story around it and is exciting and interesting. And we almost need to really do that for ourselves as well. So see this food as, amazing, tasty, nutritious stuff, because when we're perceiving it that way in our own minds, it makes it much more naturally palatable. So much of our taste is controlled by our brain that we don't even realize that that's the case.
I think it's really interesting. And I appreciate the fact that we brought up the family situation, because some parents may take a step back and think how they communicate with kids, how they can take a look into themselves and ask, am I being a good role model? And am I speaking the right language? And how am I reacting to this food?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, a lot of people that I work with that have issues around food or that have an unhealthy relationship with food, very often they grew up in households where, for example, their parents were always on a diet or were always scared
Oh,
to eat
yeah.
food because it would make them fat. And there's a lot of often negative connotations around food in their youth, which actually they then carry through to them in their adulthood. And then they'll say to me, oh, I can't believe I'm saying this, or I'm embarrassed to say this, but when I was a kid, my mum was always on a diet. And they don't realize the significant effect this is having on their lives 20, 30 years later, that really children do pick up what's going on around them. They
Oh,
are looking at their parents as role models for how they should behave and even interact with things like food and exercise and all of these things.
you know, and I know people do not maybe sometimes like to share family stories, but those are the ones that really hit us the most. And my sister is going through exactly a challenging time right now with her own son. But my personal sister to sister advice was, sweetheart, look at yourself and your relationship you have with food, and then ask yourself why your son doesn't want to eat vegetables. It was as simple as that, and it was like an aha moment. And of course the discussion had to be very gently presented, because we know how family members can feel offended, right? Well, what do you know? I know better. But it really made her realize that it starts with her before she can expect anything from her child to really change about the way how he reacts to vegetables particularly.
Absolutely, and even broadening out beyond children, the household, the family unit, really, mealtime is such a social thing. And they say that the gatekeeper of the fridge, the person who stocks up the fridge, really then influences the health and well-being of the whole household, his or her partner, the children, anyone that lives in the house, because really we are really influenced by the people that we have around us as well. So yeah, generally the family unit and the choices you're making around food as a whole can either be extremely positive for all of you or extremely negative for all of you. So that's a really interesting topic and field.
Absolutely. So tell me, actually, if someone is coming to you and the first thing they say, well, I am really feeling depleted, I do not have energy, where do you start with that person?
To be honest, the place I would start is their sleep. Now, sleep, I think, is the most probably undervalued thing in our culture and our society, and very few medical professionals, weight loss specialists, very few people will look to address sleep as a starting point, but it really is the foundation of any sort of change you want to make to your behavior or your lifestyle or anything at all. The studies and the research show that when you're sleeping enough and getting good quality sleep, you boost your metabolism, you're better able to process carbohydrates, you're less likely to crave sugary foods. It manages all of your hormones.
Sure.
It's so beneficial getting a good night's sleep that the first step often is to look at people's sleeping patterns and see how they're sleeping, where they might not be sleeping, and then what we can do to actually optimize their sleep quality as well.
And when someone has a difficulties with a sleep, is it in your spectrum of services that you offer? Do you go into their diet? Do you first look at their mindset and psychology? Do you look what they eat, particularly throughout the day, and why they, are awake and cannot fall asleep? Like, what is the first thing you take a look into? Because sleep has so many, the way we sleep or we cannot fall asleep, there are so many internal and external factors that can affect it, right? So
Yeah,
where do you start particularly?
absolutely. So I use some techniques called CBTI, which is a form of therapy which is used typically around sleep. And
Okay.
we implement a range of different strategies depending on what's going on for that individual. So typically it will mean avoiding caffeine before a certain time in the evening, in the afternoon, sorry. It will mean avoid sugar before a certain time, again in the afternoon, regulating the sleep patterns so that individual is going to sleep and waking up at exactly the same time, creating the right environment for sleep, so a cool, dark room, looking at things such as whether they're going outside and getting any sunlight exposure, because our skin, when it's exposed to the sun, that helps to regulate our natural cortisol and melatonin cycles, which then regulate our sleep rhythms. So there's a range of different factors that we explore to see whether they're really getting that optimum sleep. And if they're not, then working at the areas which are probably missing for them. Because also from a neuroscience perspective, and you probably know about this already, but for anyone that's listening, there's a part of our brain, massive oversimplification, but there's a part of our brain that's very primitive. And what that does is it just churns out certain habits in response to certain triggers. And a lot of our food related behaviors are just habits. So we just do them. We just wake up and we eat chocolate, or we just wake up and we, probably not eat chocolate, but eat cereal.
I was going to say that's a pretty interesting choice.
Or cereal. It's just good content. Whatever it is, the bad habit that we're in, we just are in that habit and we just perform those habits on autopilot, just naturally. Now, overlaying that habit primitive forming part of our brain is something called our prefrontal cortex. Now, that's our willpower center. It's our rational, more controlled, more evolved part of our brain. And that basically acts like a yes or no filter over everything that's coming out of this more primitive part. Now, the interesting thing is this part is what enables us to say, no, don't eat chocolate cake for breakfast, have some avocado instead. Now, when you're tired, when you're drunk, or when you're stressed, this part slows down and stops, which means you're at the mercy of all of your unhealthy habits. So if you want to make any changes to your lifestyle, to your thinking patterns, to your behaviors, this part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex, really needs to be working effectively. So it's really important in that moment that you're trying to make those different choices for yourself, that you're not drunk, that you're not too stressed, and that you're not tired either, which is why tiredness and looking at sleep is often the first point of intervention. A lot of people come to me and say, I just don't have the willpower. And I ask them, well, how tired are you? And they tell me, really tired. Well, that's why you don't have the willpower, because your prefrontal cortex has shut down.
There's, gosh, so many things that go into it. And as you know from our previous conversation, me as a structural balance and flexibility coach, I always pay attention to exactly different head movements that need to be applied to the rest of the body when people move as a pre-warm-up, whatever the athlete is doing, because I address that. If you do not wake up your nervous system, and if you will not deliver the movement with a proper breath, you are limiting yourself and you are limiting the success that you can have. That's why the first thing, in the morning I like to do is to stretch in my bed, because it really wakes me up and makes me feel just absolutely alive. And my husband knows I even prefer if he goes, because the entire bed is mine and I can twist and flip and do all kinds of things for a good 10 minutes. So yeah, I love the fact that you've mentioned it, because people need to start thinking, pay attention to how you move, how you eat, how you think of yourself, and you will really gain the energy. I mean, I will take the opportunity right now and I will convert a little bit my question into your past. How different did you perceive the subject of health, energy, weight loss when you were a lawyer?
Yeah, it's really an interesting question, actually, because I think back then, not having a full understanding and not having done all the training yet, I bought into a lot of what was the information that's publicly available. So, just exercise more, just eat less, and that's all you need to do to be healthy. I didn't really understand that was very nuanced, and that health is about so much more than just physical health. It's about our emotional health. It's about our mental health. It's about so many different things that play a huge role. And the thing that you were talking about just now, how just simple things like changing your posture, changing the way you're moving your body, how much of an impact that can have on your health as a whole. Now I often use a technique called CBT, and that shows that there's a connection between our thoughts, our emotions, and then our behaviors. And if we're thinking bad thoughts, we often feel bad, and then that affects our posture. So we're not as upright and we're not, carrying ourselves in a good way. And often one of the ways we intervene using that technique is through getting people to improve their posture, through looking at how they're carrying themselves, their body movements. Because actually, if you hold your head up high and you're carrying yourself well, you're much likely to think better thoughts and then feel better. So I think back when I was a lawyer, I saw all of these things as disconnected. So I didn't know that sleep affected your mental health, or that your physical body or your exercise affected, your emotional health. I saw them as all disconnected areas. Actually, the more you learn about it, the more you realize that all of it's intertwined, and you can't really change one thing without looking at everything else as well.
Absolutely. I love the fact that you went from a one very rational, you can rationalize probably any case that you had as a lawyer, but when it came to your health, it was more than that, that you had to go a little bit deeper and have exactly an emotional balance develop that potentially your job was not even allowing you to, because you were constantly under a severe stress, and there was not even maybe, and I'm not here to say for a fact, that there was not enough even a time to take for yourself to think about things of this nature.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to like mental health, I often say that the sad thing is not many people stop to check in with themselves. So like with cancer and our physical health, we're told check yourself for any lumps and bumps, see what's going on, see how you're doing. But when it comes to our mental health, our emotional health, how we're feeling, we don't ever stop and say, how am I doing? How am I feeling right now? And actually, that's such a crucial part of making sure that we are well, physically, mentally, is to stop in and ask ourselves, am I really taking care of myself? A lot of people I work with say they feel guilty. I need to help my sister, I need to help my friend, I need to do all of these different things. But there's a reason, for example, in an aeroplane, they tell us to put our oxygen mask on first before we put an oxygen mask on someone else.
What
Because
else?
when we're taking care of ourselves, when we're checking in with ourselves, and we're making sure we're okay emotionally, physically, mentally, all of these things, we're in a much better place to then help and support all of those other people around us as well.
I since I lost my mom, actually, my perception of this have changed completely, because I always, as she had two daughters, me and my sister, and I always felt exactly, I need to be there to support her. I need to do this and that. My perception of life and health have changed tremendously. But what I have realized in this really deep transformation that I went through was I really was escaping the truth about myself. And I was almost being unfair with myself. It was easier to look at others, my even family members. It was easier to pay attention to them, because then I was taking the time away from myself. And was I doing it consciously or unconsciously? It didn't matter at that time, but I was constantly doing it. And when I lost the most important person in my life, it hit me that regardless if I was there when she was falling from the stairs or I wasn't there, there was nothing that I could do to prevent that from happening. But what I need to start paying attention to is my own emotional health. And I don't want anyone, as we're having this conversation, to really feel like they need to wait for a tragic accident to take place for their deep transformation and for starting to care for themselves, because that is the most important part. Like I started our video by saying, our health is our biggest wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you mentioned, drawing those boundaries, taking time for you, taking time to check in with your needs. Very often, when it comes to weight loss, as an example, people who are often turning to food for that emotional satisfaction, it's because they're not checking in with what they really need. And I've seen that with so many of my clients. They admit to me, do you know what? I think it's because I'm unfulfilled that I'm eating, or because I'm bored, or because I lack intimacy, or there's some other need, emotional need, which perhaps they've been in denial about, or they've not taken the time to check in with themselves and find out, what do I really want? What's right for me and good for me? And then as a result, food becomes, or alcohol or smoking or gambling or shopping, something else becomes a coping mechanism, just to deflect attention away from what it is that's really bothering them, what's really weighing them down deep down.
What is really the truth, the communication with yourself before you can improve it with anyone else, right?
Absolutely, definitely.
And I hope that people understand, in order to be successful and happy in general, they really need to be happy with themselves, who they are. And
Yeah,
it starts with them.
absolutely. And a lot of my clients come to me with incredibly low self-esteem, incredibly low self-esteem. In fact, I think we have an epidemic of low self-esteem, people tearing themselves to pieces. I've even worked with people that are supermodels, objectively the most attractive women that there are out there, still completely tearing themselves to pieces, arguably more so than other people I've worked with. And often they think, if I'm tough on myself, if I'm harsh with myself, that will motivate me to achieve more, do better. But actually, if you think about, when someone pays you a compliment, it feels really nice. But then when someone insults you, it feels awful. So if you're spending your whole day insulting yourself, basically just being critical of yourself, just think about how you then feel throughout the day. You're going to feel awful. And that's really going to affect the state of your mental health. And then often you'll make suboptimal choices for your health because you're talking to yourself so negatively. You feel so bad. And maybe then you'll eat more to make yourself feel better again, or you'll turn to some other coping mechanism. So you're absolutely right. Really, the starting point is self-acceptance. And once you have that self-acceptance, then everything else can flow from there.
And I think I'm happy to see that there's more and more programs and people starting to speak about it, and the experts, just like yourself, and then the influencers, because there's so many of them. And they're unfortunately the part that always will be, so-called bullies. And you know what? I have a very healthy approach to that. I look at those people and I feel sad for them because they don't even understand why they're doing it. They're so broken inside, and there's so much about themselves that they're speaking about when they're making those comments or accusations and disgusting remarks. And unfortunately, not everyone is as strong or maybe aware and has the clarity of a mind like you and I discussing about right now. But again, our advice is, feel sorry for them, embrace your power, and don't digest their words, because there is no purpose for you to bring their misery into your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's completely right, because it's hurt people that hurt people. So when people are coming and being malicious or being mean, often it's because they're fearing, they're scared, or they're hurt themselves. And so the best thing you can do is not take that on board, like you said, because often it's coming from a place of them being extremely wounded themselves, or them lacking self-esteem. Because when someone feels good and positive, they wouldn't be giving that out to other people. They wouldn't have time to give that kind of negative energy out to other people. So a good way to look at it is that that person must be very hurt. They must be hurting a lot, or must be very scared. And that must be why they're responding in this way.
I never like to bring politics to conversations, but I will allow myself to say this. I am beyond shocked the way how our politicians talk about each other going against parties. But the only one question I always ask myself is, wow, how poorly they have to feel about themselves if their best approach to present themselves in the right light is to attack the other person from a perspective that it's not even caring, that it's not helping them in their own absolutely vision as an expert, as a leader, especially as a leader and as someone that we should follow. It's so sad on so many levels, but again, I always say there are so many deep wounds and so many gaps in that person's systems, and especially nervous system. And then I go as a coach, why they do not move more, why they do not have someone who can talk to them, and how they cannot really eat properly, so they would see how out of balance they are. I truly believe our politicians should be having a movement class from early morning just to awake and open up their body so they will have a proper oxygenation and a blood flow to really increase their positive, deep, clean energy. And maybe they would change the way how they really speak about other people. And it comes to everyone, not just politicians, of course.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, because actually I've worked with a lot of women who've told me that a lot of their internal narrative is taken up by comparing themselves to other women, or judging other women, or criticizing other women internally. Now, they don't mean that maliciously, but they do always find that they're looking for flaws in other women to basically tear them to pieces. Now, that's not because they're malicious people, it's not because they're mean people, but it's because they feel so bad about themselves that they just need to find something wrong with someone else so that they can then feel better about themselves. When actually, obviously, a much better solution would just be to get them to a place where they felt good about themselves, so they wouldn't need to look for flaws in other people or judge other people. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and it's really a shame that even in politics we're seeing that happening.
And it's really, when you think about that, people who have money, people who have resources, it's the most important part, shouldn't be in the position to be the negative judges of someone else who they really even didn't have an opportunity to meet on a deep level, to judge them in any way and make any kinds of an accusations and make any kinds of an awful statements. And my personal and professional always advice is, if you pay attention so much to negative, you are missing so much positive things, and you are really losing your energy on something that is going to really affect you emotionally and physically.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, in a lot of the psychology work that I do, we always say you get more of what you're looking for. So if you're looking, or actively looking, for the gift or the positive or the things to be grateful for, the good stuff, you just find more of that stuff. You just see more of what you're looking for, because there's so much out there that our brain can only take on so much stimulus. Our brain can only take up so much information. So if the types of information you're looking for out in the world are positive, good things, then you're just more likely to see those things and find those things and then feel much better. And then that cycle continues, where you continue to feel good and feel better.
Yeah, no, I like that. I appreciate that. And I think both of us provide a life that allows us to be happy inside, and we bring positiveness to our life, but we generate it from early morning. It starts with us, as the entire conversation and video is about. Be aware, everything that you want to do, achieve, starts within you.
Absolutely. And that's really an empowering message for someone to realize that, a lot of people think that the world is happening to them, or they feel out of control, or they feel, all this stuff is happening to me. But exactly as you said, actually everything is coming from us, from within us. Even the way we perceive the stuff that's going on around us,
Absolutely.
we're the ones perceiving it. It's coming through our own filter of the world. So absolutely, I think everything starts with us, and that's a really empowering message.
I love it. I absolutely love it. It's always such a pleasure to speak with you and have you on. I know for you it's almost end of the day. For me, it's middle of the day. I will just kindly say to our people, remember what we have shared with you, how you think of yourself and how you perceive yourself, how you interact with yourself and others will affect your energy, and by the end of the day, your purpose. So I highly recommend actually to just go and enjoy your day and bring a better energy within you to really experience of being alive.
Thank you so much for having me.
And what would you like to say as a last?
So I think I would like to say that we have loads to be grateful for, all of us, every single one of us. There are so many things when we stop and think about it in our lives that are good, so many great people. And I think very often in the day-to-day stress and the worry and the chaos, we lose sight of the fact that actually we have so much. We have food on our table, we have a roof over our head, we have so many opportunities. And actually, as we stop and think about how much we have, we realize that all of us are actually incredibly lucky.